Most modern Linux uses grub2 as their bootloader. However, there are a few differences when it comes to the operating systems or the distributions of Linux involved. Debian and Ubuntu do things drastically different than Red Hat and CentOS. So I really just want to take you through a tour of the boot file locations on various systems and what we have to do with them, because it's a little bit different how you update the files as well. So let's first of all go to Ubuntu. There's going to be two main locations that we look for boot files. One is going to be, well, first we start in the boot folder. Okay, so inside the boot folder, we're going to see there's a bunch of these different kernel stuff and then the grub folder. So inside the grub folder, if we look, we're going to see there's a grub.cfg. So we know that this is grub2, not grub legacy or grub1. And so we know that this is using grub to boot. However, if we want to make changes, where we're going to make changes mainly is going to be inside the etc default folder. So go into etc default, and there's going to be a whole bunch of configuration files in here. The one we want to look at is aptly named grub. So let's actually just look at that. And this is where we make changes. Let's say we want to show the splash screen or not show the splash screen, blah, blah, blah. These are all different types of configuration changes that we can make. And if you look at the top here, it says if you make a change to this file, run update grub afterwards, and it will update all the proper files, namely that, boot grub.cfg. We don't actually edit that file directly. We edit this file and then run update grub, and it will make all the changes necessary to our system. So it's really simple to do on Ubuntu. It's not any more difficult to do on Red Hat, but it is very different. So I want to look there because it's a little bit more confusing, to be honest. There's more folders and more specific. So here we are, we're on a CentOS machine. CentOS and Red Hat are the same thing when it comes down to it. So we're going to go into the boot folder here, and it's going to look a little bit different. There's an EFI on this one. So we know that this has a UEFI ability, right? This computer has probably the UEFI boot code, and then grub and grub2 folders. Now, normally, you use a same folder called grub on Linux distributions, and it's either grub or grub2 regardless. But in Red Hat, they actually use a folder called grub2. So you just have to kind of explore a little bit to see where your files are. Because if we look inside the grub folder, just the one named grub, there's like one file that is nothing to do with actual boot code. It looks like a splash screen or something. If we look in the grub2 folder, that's where the meat and potatoes are, right? That's where grub.cfg is. So, we know that it's grub2 because of this grub.cfg, but also because the folder is called grub2, right? So this is a little bit different in that there's an actual grub2 folder that you look into instead of just a folder called boot grub. Nonetheless, that's where your files are. And the same thing as before. If we go into etc default, we're going to see some files here. One of them is grub. So we, again, make changes here if we want things. Now, this isn't commented as well, but this has, the same sort of changes that we can make. And then once we make changes here, one thing about CentOS is there is no update grub command, and that makes it a little bit frustrating. Now, it will update grub when you update the kernels. It does a lot of stuff automatically, but that nice little script isn't there. Okay, there's one more configuration file in here that I want to show you. That this one doesn't exist in Ubuntu, and that is cd ... It's going to be grub.cfg. Oop. Oh, it's actually called grub2.cfg. See, it's really important to explore. vi grub2.cfg. And we're going to see this is the file that we do not edit. Okay, we have to use grub2 make config using templates. Oh my goodness, what does that even mean? Well, here's the deal. There's no update grub command, but it's not too difficult if we make changes to the etc default grub file to actually update the grub code. So what we have to do is type grub2 make config -o for output to etc grub2.cfg. And what it's going to do is it's going to create that configuration file based on like the etc default boot configuration file, etc, etc. All right, so we'll do that. It found all the kernels. It's going to create everything using all of the configuration changes that we actually didn't make, but we could have made. And then it updates it. Now this etc grub2.cfg, well, check this out. ls-l grub star, we're going to see it actually points to that boot grub2 grub.cfg. So that's actually the file that is updated, but we have to use that grub2 make config. And again, the going back and forth between Ubuntu and CentOS, you just have to look because it's easy to get confused. Is it going to be grub.cfg or grub2.cfg? And in this case, it's grub2.cfg in the etc folder that points to grub.cfg in the grub2 folder. Oh my goodness, it can be so confusing. But just know the kinds of files you're looking for, and you'll find them. You'll say, okay, I see what it is. It's, grub2 is this, but it's pointing to the grub.cfg, and it just happens to live in a folder called grub2. Now, just like that etc default grub file, it will also look inside this grub.d folder that you see with all these files inside, and those files will be parsed just right alongside the etc default grub file to create that grub.cfg file. So there's tons of places that you can make changes to the grub configuration, and this is just one more thing you have to search for depending on what system you're on. It's really not that important to remember exactly which distribution does things in exactly which way. What's important is to be able to find the files by looking for them. Just do a lot of ls and grep for grub, and you're going to find the files you need. They're just going to be named a little bit differently or be in slightly different locations on your file system. So don't be intimidated by boot file locations. Just do a little bit of investigation and you'll find them without any issue whatsoever. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.